We've received the new HEROES Act bill just yesterday. This is the bill that includes the $1,200 direct stimulus payments to individuals that we're all so excited about, we're hopeful for. It's so popular. However, upon receiving a new bill, of course, there's arguments on both sides and from the Fed, people saying you need to speed up funding, you need to slow down funding, you need to increase funding, you need to decrease funding this way, that way, every single direction. So let's dive into the facts of the HEROES Act, who's saying what, and then determine what exactly we can expect to see next. So starting with the facts of the HEROES Act, just so we can have some context here as to what exactly is being argued over. So first off, it provides nearly $1 trillion in funding for state, local, and territorial and tribal governments. That's the biggest portion of the bill. It's a massive portion, really. It includes $200 billion to ensure essential workers who have risked their lives during the pandemic. I can't say that C word. There's a new C word. Determined that they received their hazard pay. An increase in $75 billion in funding for coronavirus testing. An additional direct stimulus payment, this is what we're also excited about, the $1,200 payment per individual up to $6,000 per family. It extends an additional unemployment through the end of the year. That's the $600 additional unemployment. And then there's certain stipulations that can extend it through March of next year. It includes $175 billion for rent and mortgage assistance. And if you're interested in more information on that, I have an entire video on that as well on my channel. Go and check that out. It's actually pretty darn interesting. Increased funding for SNAP food assistance programs and funding for mail-in voting. That's the bulk of the funding on this bill. So this bill is set to be voted on Friday. However, it may be pushed back for a slightly later date, with many citing that understanding an 1,800-page bill before Friday is a monumental task. I mean, it took me more than 2 hours yesterday to understand and digest just over 100 pages on the rent and mortgage assistance portion of the bill, and that's not even 10% of the bill. So I think it's understandable to give them a few more days. It doesn't really make sense to put so much pressure on understanding that. I mean, they're just simply not going to have an understanding in just a few days of that huge of a text. So Representative John Varmuth stated, "We've had opportunities to ask questions about the bill, but to actually delve into the text is something that we haven't had opportunity to do yet. Maybe everybody can get through it by Friday. I'm not sure. It wouldn't bother me if we waited until next week." He added, I agree there's nothing sacred about getting this done on Friday as opposed to next Tuesday, but that's a leadership call." And that's a reasonable assessment on his part. So the bill itself hasn't received the most welcoming response, if we're being completely honest. Senate Majority Leader McConnell had the following comment regarding the bill. "What you've seen in the House from Nancy is not something designed to deal with reality, but designed to deal with aspirations. This is not a time for aspirational legislation. This is a time for practical response to the C-word pandemic." Basically a response of, no. So McConnell has been pushing for a pause in increased funding for weeks now, arguing that only a small portion of the original $2.2 trillion CARES Act has actually been spent, and we haven't even had the time to measure the effects of the money that has been spent through that program. He adds that if there were to be additional funding, that it should be very narrowly targeted to fix specific problems, not another huge blanket bill. So, I mean, that's something to also ponder. So this is where people are all over the board, and I'm honestly conflicted about it myself. I see it from both sides. I personally live in a camp of test, measure, execute. That's how I live my life. That's how I run my businesses. It's really hard to make good decisions without data. However, I understand also the people who are saying, this is an unprecedented time, so unprecedented times need unprecedented action. You don't always have perfect data. It's really conflicting on which side exactly to go to. So the questions here to ask yourself, or we need to try and figure out an answer to ultimately, is how long does it take to get the reliable data? how much funding is actually remaining from the CARES Act, and how effective was the funding that has already been spent in the CARES Act, and what are the implications of waiting another 2 to 4 weeks. I mean, if there's no difference in waiting 2 to 4 weeks, we might be better waiting. If we find that funding is needed today, well, then we should fund today. So one of my major concerns here is it's really hard to go back on something once you take that leap. I mean, for example, I personally believe that many businesses were closed too soon before we had really reliable information on whether they should close or not. And this makes reopening businesses and the economy much harder, because when intuitively you don't want to reopen the business unless conditions are better now than they were when you closed it. So the concern here is impulsive action, because backpedaling after impulsive action is always much harder. So it's really conflicting. These are not easy decisions. There's not just like a black and white make this decision. So this is why we debate on all these things. However, a new bill is not completely off the table. I don't want to beat a negative Nancy over here, because there's plenty of positive light here. In the HEROES Act, we're only seeing ideas from one side so far. Senate Majority Whip John Thune stated, "We've got a lot of members with good ideas, and when there's another round and there's a need to do something, we've solicited ideas, our office has, and there's a lot of good stuff coming in the door, much of which is being voted and thought about and discussed in terms of how it might be integrated into the next CARES Act or Phase 4. Basically stating that they have ideas of their own. They're understanding that there's very likely a need for an additional bill. However, the terms might not be the exact same as the terms we're seeing on this bill that's been proposed. There's ideas on both sides. That makes sense as well. Two additions that we will likely see, that we just keep on hearing information about from that side, is a litigation shield for businesses that reopen while the pandemic is still underway. This is something that they've just been pounding on week after week, that they want increased liability protection for businesses. I personally believe that's important. I don't think people should be put in harm's way, but I also don't think businesses should have to operate and be scared of, getting a litigation against them that's going to put them out of business or cause bankruptcy or things like that, as long as they're being responsible, of course. Negligence is a whole other thing. And secondly, a reform or update on the additional $600 a week unemployment benefits. The concern here is many employers are having a hard time hiring back workers when there's such an incentive for workers to just stay on unemployment, which I see both sides on that too. Businesses want to reopen. In some cases, if they're allowed to reopen, get the economy churning. But for workers, if you can stay safe at home and be on unemployment and potentially make more money than you did, well, yeah, that's the obvious choice for those people. So here's what I predict we will see coming up with this bill coming up soon. I think the Friday vote will be pushed back to Tuesday. I don't think that's an unreasonable assessment. I think it's just too crazy to assume that they can get through this bill that fast. And it's just huge, 1,800 pages. It's like one column down the middle, so it's probably more like 1,000 actual pages, but still. I also think before the vote, we'll see a revised bill sent back to the House, including those increased liability protections for businesses, reformed unemployment, and a lower dollar amount for the state and local governments. I also think that they're probably going to propose, 40 to 60% less funding for state and local governments, because that's the huge portion of that bill. And there's already been argument against bailing out states in the past. And I think they'll understand that they need help, but they probably will say they don't need quite that much help. I also believe the individual stimulus checks will stay on the bill. But I personally believe that we're just going to be looking at the exact same stimulus checks as we did the first round with the $1,200 individual payment, $500 per dependent. I think that's another instance where it'll be really hard to make it smaller than the first one. And no one's going to be super mad about one-time payment, or I guess a second one-time payment of $1,200. Yes, compared to the expectation of getting $2,000 a month, it's kind of crap, but as many people have said, the best stimulus payment is the one that's actually in their bank account. So I would not be surprised if we saw that. So these are just my educated predictions. All we can do at this point is wait. I will keep you guys updated on any pertinent news that comes up soon. That's really all I have for today. Thanks you for watching, and I hope you have a profitable day.